Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my stupendous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I am trying to get chips in between talking, and it's harder than I thought.
Almost like doing multiple things at once that involve your mouth are probably not a good idea, but I encourage you to live your best life. That other person chuckling there is our editor-in-chief, who's joining us today, Liz Harper. How you doing today, Liz?
Howdy. Having three of us should make it easier to eat chips in between talking.
Indeed.
That's my opinion.
I would agree with that statement. Well,
living the dream.
We're going to be continuing to talk about Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred campaign. So just like the last episode, there are spoilers here. If you have not finished the campaign, come back and listen to it when you're done and see if our thoughts align with yours, because I'm always curious to hear what people think about this stuff. When last we left off, Narelle had just gone off to discover the secrets of where Akarat's tomb lies, and Eru had just shown back up with a very cold expression of showing up and saying that he has to see this through to the end. Do you want to describe what happens next, Matt, or do you want me to just kind of run through it?
I mean, I honestly kind of want to hear Liz describe it, because that way we get to see her.
You go, Joe.
Okay. So you wind up going through, and when he pops back up, Narelle is trying to recite the incantation that will open up the way to Akarat's tomb. This way is located on a cliffside. Looks like there's a ton of water and like a hidden thing. Like you're going to get, you get the impression that, well, you're going down into this water one way or another. But when she says the words that you have discovered, nothing happens. This is when Eru pops up and does the whole, I'm going to help you, and says, the words you speak were not meant for one mouth. I will start, you join in with me. And it's at this point that the observant among us would have noticed that the stone glyph that Narelle was praying to, or reciting the incantation, had 3 distinct stones on it. And as Eru starts the incantation and Narelle joins in and you finish it, all 3 light up and the way is opened. The water parts, fish are left flopping on the ground, and you begin your journey down into the descent that will lead you into Akarat's tomb. You make your way through, and battles ensue as different aquatic creatures that are, I can't tell if they were like hatred based or if they were just your run of the mill standard sanctuary, semi-drowned monstrosities. Because sanctuary, nothing's safe. You can't even take the kids to the pool anymore.
Who knows? Half the time it's Mage War. It's like, who knows where these things came from? Never mind.
Yeah. So you make your way through. There's a couple additional stones that you find. They require you to recite it. It's basically like checkpoints as you make your way down to it. I think it's interesting that the vision of Akarat as the lion is in the background watching you every time you stop to make the recitation, which I thought was kind of interesting. Basically judging you, seeing if you were worthy, or just kind of making sure that Narelle was on the right path. You eventually make your way to the tomb. You find your way in, and, well, it's interesting, I guess would be the best way to put it. When you make your way into Akarat's tomb, it is this perfect junction of spirit realm and physical realm. I'm trying to think of how else to describe it. Matt, how would you describe it?
I mean, you just did. The interaction between the physical realm and the spirit realm. You're jumping back and forth a bit. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that you are in the tomb of Akarat. And the tomb is, as we find out from the entire expansion we just did, it was built by the Dedicants, the people that were essentially his, I'm just going to use the word apostles because that's the right word, the people who were his apostles, his closest friends. And there's a whole point that kind of gets glossed a little bit that I think is really interesting, in that Akarat didn't want any of this.
No, he didn't.
He didn't want a religion.
Go ahead, Liz.
The exact quote from the spirit of Akarat is, "I never wanted to be immortalized, never wanted my words cited in the justification of wrongdoing. The Zakarum did all of that and worse."
Yeah, and he very much from the during his life, he just wanted them to like try to live good lives after he was gone, but they loved him so much that they couldn't let him go. And that's why the spirit even exists. The spirit even says, "I don't know if I'm the spirit of Akarat or just some memory of him." Like there's a good deal of confusion as to what the spirit is in the spirit's eyes. It's obviously related to Akarat. This is obviously the tomb where its power is drawn from. And he talks about the ritual that they did to pin a part of his spirit here in the spirit world. But there's no specific answers. Like nothing is 100% certain about this. And it's really, to my mind, it is one of the more interesting things they've done with this kind of thing in Diablo history.
Agreed.
But regardless, yeah, that's how I would describe that.
Yeah, and when you first get there, it's looks like an empty underground water cave, because that's kind of what it is. And Nerel basically makes the statement of, what am I, did we come here for nothing? What is this place? And Eru says, no, you just are not in the right shift, right? Which is what Matt alluded to, was saying that, you switch back and forth. You go into the spirit realm and you see Akarat's perfectly preserved body, not decayed in the slightest, laid upon a slab, just sitting there waiting in rest. And Akarat's spirit greets you, essentially, and you are witnessing as Nerel finally decides to let go and remit the stone to the care of Akarat and Akarat's body. It is at this point where Eru, who, sees Akarat, you think he's just going off to the side and, doing his dedicant prayers or whatever. But then after the stone has left Nerel's care, you look over and there's blood coming out of Eru. Because Eru, at this point, it is revealed, has made a deal with Mephisto. When Maka died, it would appear that Mephisto made a deal with Eru that if Eru would essentially take the soul stone and cram it into Akarat's body, or at least take it to where it needs to go in order for Mephisto to use it as his new vessel, that he would spare Nahantu, that everything would be okay for just Eru. The rest of the world, Eru doesn't care, but he already lost Maka. He wasn't going to lose Nahantu as well. And so Mephisto, preying on guilt and fear, and, it's one of those things where I'm always reminded of Star Wars, where it's like fear leads to hatred, hatred leads to the dark side type thing. Fear is sort of like that seed of hatred, right? It's very easy for you to be afraid of something only to really then turn it into rage against something else. Because if you're mad at something, if you inherit that rage, you don't have to be afraid anymore because you have something you can essentially unleash onto. And that's what happens with Eru. And that's where Mephisto is able to get in. So at this moment, Eru has marked his face with a glyph, used his blood to open a portal. That portal then allows the wolf, fully empowered avatar of Mephisto, to travel into the vault of Akarat. And this thing is a monstrosity. It is, the best way that I can describe it is it reminds me of a Tyrannid from 40K, particularly like the Carnifex or the Lictors. Its mouth is distended and opens in multiple parts. It has tentacles and fleshy bits all over itself. And in this moment, Akarat is, stands before you and tries to guard you, and Nerel takes a massive hit and is on the ground as the wolf stalks around and makes fun of you. Then you go to fight and realize that in this encroaching darkness and this corruption that is sort of circling and swallowing the room around you slowly but surely, Nerel entreats to Akarat to get up just one last time and fight because they need him now more than ever. And the battle ensues, and this is the penultimate boss battle of the game, where you face off against specifically the fully empowered avatar with Akarat's help. Akarat grants you his power. His power allows you to fight the wolf, which until this moment, or until that particular moment, is immune to anything you do to it. As the fight goes on, you essentially make your way through different phases. The wolf summons more and more monstrosities into the vault, and then you eventually do defeat it, but at the cost of Akarat's immortal soul. As Akarat, the lion, starts to dissipate, it forms into its human form again, which, if you've seen the lion form, and I commented on this the last time, it was a little bit on the disturbing side, simply because if you looked at its paws, those were not paws, those were hands. And that's something that I would pull in an RPG game and make everybody slam that door shut and move to another room. You make your way out of the tomb, and then you have to essentially go back and you find yourself back to Ormus, with the council of Nahantu. He tells you, I'm skipping over something. When you get out, you wind up facing Eru. Eru wants to die for his sins, essentially. He knows what he did is wrong. You have the comment with him that, the deal with Mephisto would never go his way, that he will find, I believe Narel says he will find a way to betray you with the first chance. He will hold to the letter, but not the spirit of the agreement. And
one of the things about that when I was watching it was it's incredibly easy to come up with like so many different ways he could do it. One of which is he keeps saying that his brothers are returning.
Yeah.
They'll destroy Nahantu.
Or the
Baal
war between them
literally destroys everything. That's what he does.
He is the Lord of Destruction.
Yes.
So yeah, it was one of those things where, especially since I was playing a barbarian, I was like, have you heard of Akarat? Remember the World Stone? Mount Akarat? I mean, not Mount Akarat. It's Mount Ariyat. Like, have you heard of Mount Ariyat, where the World Stone was kept? You notice it ain't there anymore. If Baal comes back, he's going to walk through Nahantu like he's going on a stroll, and everything will die. And Mephisto will have not lied. He didn't do it. Baal did. Like, for F's sake, man.
Yeah, but it's an interesting... Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
All of this feels like it happens narratively very fast. It's like there's not been very much time between parting from Eru and Eru returning to betray you, and betray you to Mephisto, of all things. And you leave the temple, and then Eru's there, and he's like, I'm real sorry about this, but I would do it anyway. And it just feels like you've gone through a little bit of a roller coaster in a very abbreviated period of time. It just doesn't feel like the story had much time to develop there. Because, as both of you have said, the decision to ally with Mephisto is madness. This is not going to protect Nahantu. It's just releasing hatred into the world.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the pacing of it. In that I didn't have a problem with it, because when you get to the point where you're going to the tomb, it feels like the way that the game is setting things up, it feels like you are on a clock.
Yeah.
And that stuff is happening. It deliberately feels like stuff is happening really fast. Like you and Narel are trying desperately to get there before she loses it. And you go to that town, and just there's a lot of stuff going on. That part didn't bother me. And him showing up at the end like that didn't bother me, because I felt like he didn't even leave. He wasn't, he poured it out of the tower. He handed the thing off to whoever Mephisto's servants were there. And then he just stayed and waited to get killed, because he knew this was a horrible betrayal. He even says to you, you deserve better.
Yeah.
He knows what he's done is wrong. He just couldn't bear it anymore. He couldn't bear watching it happen. It's like, it's one thing to know it's gonna happen. It's another thing to see it. He saw his student die. He saw, he saw Akarat basically get defiled, knowing that's his fault. There's a lot. When what's the other name? I can't remember the other one's name. Something. Abulan.
Abulan.
No.
Yeah.
When Abulan died, that was the first big hit to him.
Yeah.
And then after that, after Abulan died, then he lost his student. That's when he broke. He's like, I can't take any more of this. I just can't. It's got to end. If I just give him what he wants, at least he'll go destroy something else. Maybe they can stop him somewhere else. So I didn't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with the point where it stops. And I think we can talk more about that because we've pretty much covered it, right? Are you done, Joe, or you want to go a little more?
Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit more because you go back and you talk with Ormus. In this moment, you are told that you need to become a symbol of hope, or at least a symbol to Nahantu, because the people have lost so much. The news of Eru's betrayal has spread, because nothing is secret in this world. You go on, basically, this is where like sort of the end game opens up, and introduces you to the things like, the Undercity and, things like that. One of the final moments I think, which is actually really interesting, is that Ormus, when you're done with the Undercity and everything, sends you actually to go talk with the Tree of Whispers. Because Nahantu has shielded itself from the tree's vision for decades, centuries. We don't know how long, but they send you to go essentially make peace with the tree, because at this point we're hitting a point where everybody's going to need allies. And this sort of ties in with sort of like the larger bit of the story, which we'll talk about in a little bit. While this is going on, we are treated to the final cutscene of the expansion. Well-ish. Where you see Akarat's body in the temple, and I forgot which temple this is. It's the one in, I want to say it was the one, not in Karast.
Was it in Travancore?
It was either in Travancore or it was the one over by Chaldeum. I can't remember. It was the one where we had the corrupted monks, I believe. I think that was Chaldeum.
Where he had
Go ahead.
Where he had that circle of all of his acolytes.
Yes. But you go in, you see the scene of Akarat's body laying there with the soul stone pressed into his chest, the black tendrils reaching out through the flesh as black blood begins to bubble up from the middle of the circle, encasing the entire body of Akarat inside of this goo, to which Mephisto's new vessel is born, wreathed in a crown of thorns, a little bit more exaggerated than that, wielding a blade of black, just metal and blood and iron that looks just absolutely wicked and nasty. All of the statues of the disciples are completely melted down by this. And it is a statement I believe he makes, is that, he will walk among the world, among the innocents, just kind of pervert everything that they hold dear. And I mean, he's in the body of his greatest nemesis at this point, because Akarat is his greatest nemesis. And he's going to do what we've seen them do before, like multiple times.
They did to the Quahagen.
They did it to the Quahagen. They did this with the Church of the Triune. They did this with the like, if you go back and read the Sin Wars, this is not new. They're used to doing this type of stuff. And then you get into the state of the world, and this is kind of where the game ends, where people either really love it or really hate it. And that's one of the reasons why we brought Liz on, is because Matt and I are I think we're on the same wavelength. We may have minor differences, but I think we're both pretty happy with where the expansion led story-wise. So I'm curious, I'm going to let Liz go first. What did you think of this? And, you mentioned before we started recording that you were definitely very happy with the gameplay experience, but maybe not necessarily so happy with the story. So I'm very interested why.
I feel like we really rushed through a lot of story really quickly, and a lot of this felt unearned. Like, it was at the end of the original game, it was this huge, terrible thing that we had this soul stone. We needed to figure out what to do with it. Narella's run off. We don't know what she's going to do. And, you get here, and once you find Narelle in here, it's just like, okay, let's walk into the Temple of Akarat. And, it just feels, even though the ending was almost the worst possible thing that could have happened, the story feels a little unearned, undeveloped. It felt rushed to me. And even before now, like Urivar showing up, being presented as the big villain, and he shows up in the beginning and he, stabs you, and then he spends half the expansion looking for you, and then when he shows up again, you immediately kill him, and that whole thing is over. And then you go into the into more of the Soul Stone and searching for Akarat's tomb and a place to work and be laid to rest safely, which is questionable. We've yet to find a place to safely store a Soul Stone because they corrupt everything around them. And it feels like the pacing of the whole thing was too fast. It felt like they shoved 2 acts into 1 act, and so you got 2 halves of a story that felt a little too fast and a little too undeveloped. It just felt too easy to do all of this, even with the way it ended. I mean, the ending was great. This was totally in character for Mephisto. It's probably... And one thing I can't decide, and maybe y'all tell me what you think, is this what Mephisto planned all along? Was he, in the original game, just kind of taunting us and trying to get the Soul Stone in the hands of someone naive that he could manipulate? And he wanted this?
I think that's kind of always their goal, to at least a little bit, right? And this is sort of straight out of the playbook, and we've seen Diablo do this multiple times, right? Mephisto hasn't done this multiple times, but he's watched Diablo do it. And Diablo's done it to great effect, to the effect where he waged war on the high heavens, the first of the primevals ever to be able to take the fight to the angels like that. Usually their encounters are in hell, where the angels are swooping down and doing battle in the hells or on sanctuary. And he did it by essentially doing 2 things that we see Mephisto do here. 1, preying upon innocence, and 2, using the Soul Stone, the black Soul Stone, the prison that he was contained in, as sort of a, I don't want to say a beacon of false hope, but the people who had the stone felt that he was more contained than he was. And here this is a Soul Stone that was not made to contain a primeval. Let's be perfectly clear about this. This was a repurposed stone, that was we don't have enough time to do a real one. This one was for Astaroth. We're going to have to make this work, to then us going into hell, trying to beat Lilith to Mephisto, and then us battling his daughter, who would have consumed him in his power, and then giving our choice over to a grieving child. I think this, not all of it was planned. I don't think he planned that we were going to give it to Nerel, although certainly there would have been something to that, considering we, as the big dumb hero, we're compromised and we know it, right? Like, this is one of those rare instances where we tried to make the smart decision as the player character in a game, and he knows we're going to try to make the smart decision. Lorath won't make this choice because Lorath feels himself unworthy, feels himself compromised, feels that he's failed too many people.
Plus, he's not even there at that point.
Well, he's not there at that point, but like he knows that we won't give the stone to Lorath, right? Like Lorath's not in a headspace that he would be able to take it. And we know that, right? And we are not either. And flat out, like we talked about this last episode, Nerel asks you why you gave her the stone. And I think this plays into it. And it's, you tell her, I had the wolf whispering in one ear and Lilith whispering in the other. Her blood is a part of me. I'm there, like, therefore Mephisto's blood is part of me. I can't trust myself. And you see that play up in this campaign as well, where there are several moments where you are in pain because the blood is reacting, and whether that's reacting to Mephisto or the fact that I do think that Lilith will be reborn because demons don't ever die for good. She might be reforming in hell. She might be reforming in the seat of hatred.
I think she's reforming inside the player character.
That's the other thing that could happen too. She could be
like, there's
in
a
the
whole
player
point
character
during the fight with Mephisto that kind of caps off this expansion. There's a whole point where he specifically calls you
child of my child. Mm-hmm.
Not the way everyone calls her the mother. He doesn't usually call people her children.
Mm-hmm.
But he does in that fight when he's talking to you. And he makes a point of talking about how, there's no way to get rid of him.
He's
Hatred
eternal.
is something that's just inherently intrinsic to existence, and they can't root him out. He even makes the point that, through you, she endures. And by saying that, I think he's giving you a hint. The thing about Mephisto that's fascinating to me is that he never seems to lie.
Yeah.
I think that makes him a really interesting villain, because he's not being straightforward necessarily, but he doesn't lie. He's always twisting the truth a little, But he tells you in the original campaign, it's like there's going to be a point at which we aren't on, at which we'll be enemies.
Yeah.
But right now we have a mutual enemy. We can work together, and he sounds very reasonable, frankly.
Oh yeah, there's a great part of like all this different stuff about that. I kept thinking about the fact that Belial used to be Mephisto's understudy, and Belial lies constantly. So of course Mephisto wouldn't lie because that's how he's better than Belial. He doesn't need to lie. Mm-hmm. He can use the truth. And the first person to call you out on giving the Soul Stone to Nerel is Mephisto. He comes right out and says, "You let a wounded child take this burden instead of taking it yourself." Like, what were you thinking was going to happen? So yeah, there's a lot to that I really do enjoy. I just feel like, I don't know, I wanted to see how Liz or Joe feel about this.
Yeah.
In the fact that this game ends where it does, as Liz had said, it felt like two things jammed together. To me, it feels like it's been split apart unnaturally. Like this was not the ending point. Mm-hmm, there should almost immediately have been more of it to see, at least deal with what just happened. Yeah. And the fact that it just stops here and there's nothing else of that story to deal with is weird to me. Like, I understand they're going to do another expansion and it might even be out next year for all I know.
They've said yearly expansions.
Yeah, they've said that, but they've said that before about other games too. So I'll believe it when it's release schedule, This came out a year after launch. I think they're serious about making us pay for a full-priced expansion every year. Yeah, and a lot of people pointed out that I want to see what happens, because I do think at some point the series is named Diablo. And when they were doing interviews about it, they talked about how in the past Diablo was usually the boss, and then there'd be an expansion that kind of made somebody else the ultimate boss. And they wanted to not do that this time. So at some point, we've got to get Diablo back. And it feels to me like the next expansion might lead to Baal. And I definitely feel like the angels are going to show up in it. I definitely feel, based on stuff they've done, that's going to happen.
That's in the game, right? Like, that's like, and maybe we talk about this a little bit too, because one of the things you do in between all this, especially afterwards, when you're going around and doing some of the like, we're going to the end game now stuff, is you go back to the Herodrim Vault, right? You go back to their area and you see all the things that Lorath was working on. And you see that he had pulled up Rothma's prophecy again, something that he had very distinctly dismissed multiple times, right? Like, then he started to look at it again. Why is he looking at it again? He has a note for Tyrael talking about essentially bits and pieces of him actively looking for Tyrael, or a way to contact him, because we speculated about that. We speculated that would be a logical thing for Lorath to do in the aftermath of what happened in the base game after the campaign. And then we find proof that he's doing that, or at least trying to. And I think that makes, what you're saying about the angels being involved soon, I think that's inevitable. I think we're starting to actually get an escalation of the Diablo story, which sounds weird to say. But here, like, I feel that up until this point, the Diablo stories for 1 and 2 and 3 have been mostly linear, right? They have, there's a period of calm, something bad happens, big bad is unleashed in the world, we kill the big bad, shove it into a stone, there's a period of calm, the big bad from the stone breaks out, chaos ensues, we defeat the big bad, there's a period of calm, blah, blah, blah. This feels like we're hitting a fever pitch. And to Liz's point earlier, and I think the feeling of this being rushed is intentional. And the reason I say that is, in the events that happened in Diablo 3, most of humanity was wiped out. The world is trying to recover, and it really hasn't. There hasn't been enough forces to fight against the darkness, and you see that in the world. Most of the world are pockets of humanity isolated from each other, that, they can try to do caravans and stuff like that, but it doesn't quite always work. You are now hitting a point where we don't have vast armies. We don't have vast cities and cultures to fight against these forces of the primevals, of the hells themselves, any longer, like we did at the end of 1 or 2, or during the events of 3. And I think that's the frantic pace is, we are desperate. We are desperate from the very beginning, and I think that makes Eru's plight believable in that regard too. And you guys I'll stop talking and let you talk here in a second, but Eru's betrayal, and I've heard people say this seems like it's very fast. I don't think it is, right? Like, I think it's an old man worn down by watching the destruction of the world around him, watching the corruption creep ever closer to his home before we ever got there, right? Like, before go ahead.
Of course, Nahatu has been through this before when Mephisto was left in the care of the Zakarum and everyone got corrupted and everything was warped. This became a bastion of hatred in the Zakarum's time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like coming here of all places with Mephisto's Soul Stone just feels like, I mean, yeah, that's got to hurt seeing like, okay, Mephisto was here, he ruined my homeland, and now he's back.
And not only ruining the homeland, but now he's doing, like, because of your presence here, because of Nerel's presence here in particular, the spirit realm has been encroached upon in a way that it has never been encroached upon before. The spirit realm, that veil that is between them, and we talked about this a little bit, has existed in part to keep the demons out of it, because it's a vast repository of power and energy and potential. And it's created, and Matt and I talked about this last time, nobody knows what it is, but it's often in the Diablo mythos referred to as essentially a construct that is born of human thought and worship of it, but may run deeper and may be something that has existed since the time that the Nephilim were at full power. This may have been a pocket reality created because of the World Stone and the Nephilim were so tied together that they created this realm. This is how they understood death. And because of that, it existed. And because of it, this might be the pure, the spirit realm may be a pure realm of untainted power of the Nephilim, which ideally makes it very dangerous for Mephisto to have now a body that has been seeping in this spirit tea for centuries. We don't know what he's able to do now, because this is power that the primevals were never supposed to get. But also it would have made it the perfect prison for him, because the spirit realm itself can isolate itself and shift and ebb and flow with anything he can throw at it. But I think that the pace of it makes sense. The pace of Eru's betrayal, he blames Nerel. He blames Nerel for essentially not asking for help, because had she had asked for help before she ever got here and been smarter about it, they could have, in his brain, they could have avoided a lot of this tragedy, right? The hatred wouldn't have just come here willy-nilly. She could have been guided to this place before the corruption took hold. And because of her bullishness or stubbornness over it, she's caused more destruction than she necessarily needed to. And so, of course, he's going to blame her. He resents her. And then he resents the fact that she's free. Right? She's going to be free because Akarat, who is this pure symbol of like bastion of purity, like when Eru first sees Akarat, the awe and wonder that he conveys through his body language and his vocalization is apparent. And Akarat doesn't care about him, not in the same way that he cares about Nerel. Akarat wants to help Nerel, and he can't believe, wait, Akarat would want to help this person, but doesn't want to help the rest of Nahantu? You get this, like, these little tiny seeds that get planted, and it just takes one last thing to tip it over the edge, and where he's not thinking clearly. And those are the cracks in which Mephisto weaves into. He, like Matt said, he doesn't lie, but he'll make an offer. He offers it to you, the player character, multiple times, tries to get you to, and they're perfectly reasonable arguments he makes. Like, they're well measured. So I get what you're saying where it seems quick, but I think with everything that's going on in the world, because the world is essentially collapsing at this point, even more so than it has been, it feels right in line with the pace of the world essentially consuming itself.
I think my big issue with it is that you've got this Cathedral of Light story, and then you have this Soul Stone story, and they're just crammed together in a way where it feels like the Cathedral of Light thing resolved itself very quickly, and then the Soul Stone thing resolved itself very quickly, because they're trying to cram these two narratives together in a single expansion.
I want to hear what Matt says, but I think
when Liz is done, tell me and let me know, and then I'll come in, because I have a point to this. All right, the Cathedral of Light is here in this story for a very specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Cathedral of Light is both a remnant of the world before the Sin War, in that it is the creation of Inarius, and it is also directly created by Mephisto this time, because Inarius was in Mephisto's hands and driven completely insane by it. None of his decisions make sense. If you look at what Inarius did and how he reacted to the prophecy, he never got ahead of it. He never even tried to. He just followed this prophecy blindly, even though his own son told him, it's not going to go the way you want. When he's like, and I will get to return to heaven where I belong. He's like, would it that it were true, Father? And
it's like, that's pretty optimistic of you, dude.
Yeah. And all through that, when Inarius finally goes to hell to fight Lilith and Lilith destroys him, this is perfect because now there's nobody in charge of the Cathedral of Light. And I thought that whole story was basically trying to show people there's a battle of wills between the two, but Prava's not better. She's just, in a way, she's worse because she does the same thing Mephisto does, doesn't she? She's reasonable. She says things that make sense at the time. She doesn't necessarily lie. She probably was horrified by what Urvesh did to that guy who confessed and asked for mercy, because that's not how the Cathedral of Light's supposed to work. And all of that is to show the progress of the Cathedral of Light down the road that the Zakarum went.
Yeah,
and again, it's Mephisto. I'm sorry, I know you're trying to talk.
No, I just want to add something in there too. The Cathedral of Light story is not done, not even by a long shot. Yeah. The only thing that is done is Urvash is dead. That's it. That's the only thing that's finished. Even after you get through into the one of the quests you get in the post sequence game to lead to the end game content is to go and essentially take a bastion that has been taken over by burned knights, and people are being essentially given the air quote sacrament and are losing their ding dang minds. You go through and you see the vast level of corruption and mania that has taken hold of a section of the church that is just different than the other mania that has taken hold of the church that has been there since Inarius has founded it, essentially.
And I also want to point out something that Liz had done a long time ago. Liz, do you remember when we talked about the fact that right in front of the Church of Light, the Cathedral of Light, there's a big blood drop?
Yeah. And that's iconography. That's iconography you see throughout all of the churches. These drops of blood. This woman holding a chalice of blood. Blood iconography is everywhere.
And now that chalice of blood thing, they actually find it, and it starts turning people into vampires.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too.
So there's, it's kind of hard to remember this, but the blood. The blood rites and so forth. I want to say the Duchess in Diablo 2 might have been the Baroness. I can't remember if it's Baroness or Duchess, but she comes back in Diablo Immortal. You get to fight her again. There's a whole thing about this weird vampire stuff. Where is the vampire stuff coming from specifically? Is it from one of the primevals? Is it from something else? But it's definitely feels to me like they're tying it in with the Cathedral of Light story. I keep calling it the Church of Light. I know. Because that whole idea of blood and blood drops, and blood is a huge part of the cathedral's, its exorcism rite. I shed my wicked blood for you to purify it. The power in blood is very much part of everything that the Cathedral of Light does. By bringing in these burned knights, you're turning them into candles. You're using them as like sacrifices in an even more literal way. And I really do feel like this is going to tie in. Like it's tying into the other evils. Because we're not just getting the primes. We're hearing about the primes. We're hearing about Baal and Diablo. But when Mephisto says my brothers, technically everybody but Andariel is his brother and Andariel is his sister. So when he says my brothers, they could all be coming back. We already know that two of them are currently walking around Sanctuary. Both Duriel and Andariel are on Sanctuary right now, and they were involved in everything. Lilith attempted to enslave Andariel, and Duriel just attacks you because he wants carnage and pain. And there is in this whole thing the movement of these stories. I think that Liz has got a point about how they feel, because it does feel an awful lot like you're doing a lot of things, and because everything's hooked around Narelle, and when it's first presented to you, it feels odd to just, okay, and then we just went down and did it, and now Urvesh is dead, but Urvesh was never really the problem. Urvesh was simply a symptom. And so I feel like there is something to the fact that they're trying to do yearly content drops, yearly DLC type expansions, rather than a big expansion and then nothing, has positives, but it also has negatives in terms of storytelling. Like, Vessel of Hatred does not get to do what Reaper of Souls did. Reaper of Souls does this enormous, like that one act of Diablo 3 is about the size of about half the size of the entire previous game. It's an enormous act. And at the end, there's a big climactic confrontation that changes the world forever, and you're done. When the story comes around again, so they had to get it as close to complete as they could. They've now shifted to a more episodic model, and episodic models don't feel finished because they're not.
Yeah, but you definitely, even in this case, you still get a big climactic battle because.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying you don't.
And I'm just saying, like, because that's another thing that Narelle points out too, is that you destroyed a piece of infinity, right? Like, I think that's the exact line.
A shard, I think.
A shard. But you still did something that nobody thought was possible. And so things are absolutely changing, and there is huge impact for what just happened. But I'm also really kind of happy with what happened here as far as being episodic, because I would rather have an expansion every year that continues the story than us going 10 years without anything.
Oh yeah. And I played Diablo 3 like from the time it came out until yesterday. So I can say that, yeah, it gets weird when you play through it and there's never any further things. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. We got like I think there was like one little bit of completely unrelated story they added where like a weird blood temple. And I've been trying to tie that dude back into this since the whole thing came out and Liz mentioned the blood drop, because that whole place was a giant blood temple where blood was being, the blood of the Nephilim was being used in profane rites. And so I'm like, okay, what are we doing? Where is this guy coming back? Are we going to hear it? Like, where are we in this? So yeah, I definitely feel like there is room to criticize how the story felt.
Oh, I agree.
My wholly cynical feeling about all of this is that, Blizzard wants to put out an annual expansion and make us pay, $40 a year for an expansion that's the length of a single act of the original game. And I feel like the Cathedral of Light story was crammed in here. I still think it's a little abbreviated because, they're releasing a book about it next month. The Book of Prava is coming out next month, going to cost another $30. So I feel like we're getting these short stories, and each bit of game is a promotion for a book that's going to cost you more money. And that book is going to lead you into the next expansion, which is going to cost you more money. I feel like it's a content treadmill, and they're going to produce content that is short form because, yes, it has to be episodic if you're doing it once a year. But in the end, it's going to get us to pay a lot more money to play the same content. And I am feeling a little cynical about this because I felt like the game should have been, 2 good-sized acts. It felt like you could have had an in-depth story about the cathedral and still have had an in-depth story about the Soul Stone and Narelle. But it felt like we got a quick story about the cathedral kind of crammed on. And yeah, my very cynical take on that is that it had to be so that we could have the Book of Prava next month.
Yeah, and I think there might you're perfectly valid in that thought and feeling on that, and I understand where you're coming from as far as viewing that. I look at it as maybe just a little bit of the opposite side, where it was abbreviated, but the church, and I think in the first meeting you have with Prava, I think kind of sets that tone. We are not enemies right now because we have a common enemy. I'm not your focus, nor are
Just
you
like
mine.
Mephisto.
And that's
Yeah.
that's very interesting because it's almost exactly what Mephisto did in the original game. We will be enemies at some point, but not right now.
And to be fair, what happened in the first campaign? We ignored Mephisto for the most part and dealt with Lilith. We were chasing Lilith. Lilith was the focus. So yeah, there's absolutely truth in what you guys say that Prava mimics Mephisto quite a bit, but also the church isn't our focus yet. And I think the yet is the part of it. So we'll get the Book of Prava, and I'm sure that plays into it. And I'm really curious to read it because I want to see what they do with that and what gaps, if any, they fill in. But I'm also thinking that in the next expansion or the next time we get an expansion, it's not just going to be about chasing Mephisto as Akarat. It's going to be dealing with, I think, church and holy structure, because what is going to be the easiest thing for Mephisto to do as the body of Akarat? Because if you looked at it, it wasn't corrupted looking. It was just Akarat's body.
Pristine.
It was absolutely pristine. You walk into, any who hold true to the core of the Zakarum faith, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the easiest thing to revive the Zakarum and, walk into Zarbinzet, and they've been searching for Akarat for years. They've been searching for Akarat's tomb, and apparently they just
Yeah, when you do the Helltide openings, not the Helltide, the invasion openings, there's someone who's like called you out to come there because there's demons everywhere, and that person flat out says, when we will find the tomb of Akarat.
Yeah.
When we need him most, we will find him. So he's literally going to walk out as Akarat and say, "You found me. I'm here."
By the way, these people, they kept my tomb secret from you, and they're aligned with this church over here. We should probably go deal with that. Because, again, I think that's where we're going to get with the next expansion, is we're probably going to be involved in a holy war. And I'm not just saying that because, the shock value, but it seems like there's really a big setup for us getting caught in the middle of a war between the Cathedral of Light and the Zealots of the Zakarum. Because I think that's the next very likely story, because instead of chasing Mephisto, we're going to know exactly where he is. And we're going to have to deal with the fallout from it, and we're going to have to deal with the fallout of the church. But before we can do anything with going after the Zealots of the Zakarum, we're going to have to, I think we're going to wind up having to, and I don't know another way to say this, but cleanse the Church of the Light. And this may involve, Tyrael coming back down, maybe, and the angels might be tied up in this, because I'm pretty sure that's where Lorath is. And we're probably going to be dealing with rooting out the vampires and the burned husks of cosplayers of those that went to hell, in putting Prava in line. I think that's going to be what happens, and the next expansion will be dealing with that and dealing with all the fallout from the Cathedral of Light, and then having to deal with the Zakarum zealots. Matt, I saw you light up, so. Oh,
I hit the wrong button. Sorry.
But I guess that leads the question, though. Where do you think we're going?
Well, I mean, I think Liz is right in that, corporate synergy is affecting the story, and there's just no way around that. I don't think that necessarily is bad, but I do like the story of this expansion. I had the feeling when I got to the end that I was like, "Oh, are you kidding me? You're stopping here." Never been a big fan of cliffhangers. So for me, that's a negative, but everything they set up was almost pristine to me. I was like, "Oh, this is so good. We're going to see so much chaos and destruction out of this." It's the perfect plan for Mephisto. And they're also laying breadcrumbs that Lilith is going to come back. And because we know what happens to angels in hell, Tyrael's old buddy, I can't remember his name, but he's in Diablo 3. God, I am just so many names. No. I mean, I'm sure he's coming back, but I'm talking the one who's literally a demon now. Isual, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
He used to be Tyrael's right hand. He went into the hells and he became a demon. I think Inarius is going the same way. We're going to see Inarius again, and he's going to be a demon.
I thought when angels died, they went back to the Divine Gate, the Angelic
Crystal
Gate,
Arch,
to be reformed. Yeah. The Crystal Arch.
We don't know if they can do that when they're in hell.
We also don't know if they can do that after it was damaged, since Diablo did damage to it.
True.
And for that matter, the Crystal Arch and the Burning Hells themselves are equal manifestations of the original Anu. Like Tathamet's corpse and Anu and the Diamond Warrior Anu's spine are each fundamental pieces of the original entity. It's quite possible that if they die in hell, they go to Tathamet's corpse. It's evenly quite possible that demons that died in heaven went to the Crystal Arch.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be why they're having problems, because they have all these demonic essences inside the Crystal Arch. Like, there's a lot of possibilities here. I do really want to see what's next. And I really, at the same time that I'm totally nodding my head every time Liz talks about how they want to get us to pay, another however much money for the next expansion. Yeah, they've never been shy about this. This is the expansion that they wanted to make when they were still Activision, keep in mind. And Activision absolutely loves that game plan. And it's not like Microsoft hates it. The idea of more money does not bug Microsoft. They're like, people will pay us more for this game that we released? I don't see a problem.
Yeah, Microsoft wants a return on that $69 billion investment.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but at the same time, I do think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this. The character of Mephisto as the villain so far, in a way, it's actually better because he set up everything. Like, he even, like, the original, all these monsters and demons that are erupting out of the ground and attacking, Eru is the one who tells you it's not necessarily Nerel's fault because they were here before. It's just, there's a ton of interesting stuff in the interplay between Akarat's attempt to help Nerel and Mephisto's ability to use the situation to his advantage. So I am very much invested. I absolutely think we're going to get that church war. They've been pointing the way towards that ever since they had the Cathedral of Light basically just march into Chaldeum and start killing Zakharum.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we certainly see in this expansion is if you go to Zarbanzet, it's now full of people on crosses that they've been rounding up and torturing, killing for vague, unknown reasons.
Yep.
So the Zakharum, the remnants of the Zakharum, have become more extreme in the time between last expansion and this one. And are they already falling back under Hatred's grip, even without Mephisto's direct influence on them?
I think that is definitely something that we're getting to see pieces of. And I think that's one of the things they're trying to set up. They're even calling it the Age of Hatred.
Yeah.
Like, this is the quote, ever since what, I want to say Imperius, but no, wrong guy. Malthael. Ever since Malthael did what he did and killed so many people, the world that has been inherited by those who survived and their children and grandchildren is a world of hatred. It is basically Mephisto's playground. And it's interesting that he seems to have basically, even though he went to hell and he was regenerating in his fortress, his influence has been felt the longest because he did the most to the world. Sure, Baal blew up the World Stone, caused it to be blown up. He almost tainted it, but he did cause it to be blown up. That's a pretty big deal. Diablo is kind of the instigator for every single thing that happens because he's the one who keeps getting out and then freeing the others. So that's all fair. But it has to be said that whilst they were doing what they were doing, Mephisto sat inside, he killed Sankakor. No, he didn't kill Sankakor. He killed the Quahagan before Sankakor. He inhabited Sankakor like a meat suit, and he spent hundreds of years warping the Zakharum to the point where they were just burning people. And it's really interesting that the knights that we see from the Cathedral of Light in this expansion are the burning knights. When in Diablo 4, like in the story we were following, one of the subquests is you go to a settlement where the Zakharum marched in and burned this spirit. Eventually a spirit born. He was like a witch that they burned, and he erupted into flames and killed everybody.
I think he was a druid, and
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the witches are druids. It's one of the interesting things about the way that these things play out. But regardless, yeah, there's just a ton of this stuff that I keep seeing the kind of fractal nature of it. It's like this thing that happened here is a minuscule. It's a miniature of what happened with all this. The whole deal with the Zakarum, like when Elias breaks into the Zakarum, repository and steals the knowledge of how to summon a lesser evil, that's very much what the Cathedral of Light does to the Zakarum when they're trying to find Lilith.
Mm-hmm.
Like it goes back and forth on this. Like the hatred is very present in this game so far. So I'm very interested. Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry.
It's also very repetitive. I mean, it feels like both the Herodrum and the evils kind of have the same game plan on repeat. It's like the Herodrum finds an evil, shoves in a soul stone, tries to hide it. It inevitably corrupts everyone near it and gets out. And then it takes on the body. Corrupting religious orders or founding religious orders to corrupt the people it's kind of a thing they do.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder if it's just the religions of Sanctuary. We see these people with so much fervor and they're so devout that maybe they can be. It just seems it's been so easy for Mephisto and Diablo, all of them, to go in and you pull a string and you point these people in a direction, you fan the hatred that's already in their hearts, and bang, you're back where you started with a repeat of this situation, except maybe we can do it right this time. Maybe this time Sanctuary will be ours.
Yeah, and I think there's something to that cycles, right? And part of it is gameplay. Part of it, I think, is actually playing into the story. We've sort of been locked in a cycle since the Nephilim's power was taken away. Because the Nephilim, when they were at full power, could have ended the eternal conflict quite readily, actually. Reshaped reality to whatever they wanted it to be and moved on and lived whatever Nephilim happily ever after would have looked like. But with the angels let's just take their power away. And the demons trying to use that power when we finally get pieces of it back. We're locked into this completely devastating cycle of decay. And I think we're finally starting to see the tail end of it, right? Because it's been a constant thing. Every single time, like I said, it gets worse and worse. In Diablo 1, it was bad, but it wasn't as bad as it was in Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, it was bad, and it wasn't as bad as it became at the end of Diablo 3. Now in Diablo 4, there's almost no humans left, and we are the descendants of the Nephilim. The World Stone's gone. Shards of it are, all over the place, which, we haven't even dealt with that part of the story yet. And now you have one of the prime evils set up with a super powerful body. The other ones are coming back. The angels have locked themselves away. There's going to be even more war and destruction on the horizon. We're in that sort of tail end and of this sort of decaying death spiral. There was a Brandon Sanderson book that this reminded me of. I think it was Elantris, where people that were magically gifted were essentially dead and decaying because the magical rite had been interrupted and was not complete. So their power was essentially making them, for lack of a better term, magical lepers. And I look at Diablo and I see kind of that same thing where this maximum potential and power was sort of cut off. And because of that, the world itself, Sanctuary itself, is in a constant state of decay. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. So we're going to be in a cycle for a while until something breaks it, and that breaks it will be the end of the Diablo story. So I don't think we'll ever get there. Because
as long as Microsoft can make money off of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the corporate side of it, the profitability of it is there, but that means we're going to see patterns repeat themselves, not just because of gameplay, but because of the story. I think it's intentional at this point.
I also want to make a point about something. The Sin War took place thousands of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the Sin War, the World Stone was disintegrating. That's why the Nephilim were coming back. And Odyssean, by erasing himself from existence, reset the World Stone.
Mm-hmm.
And then, for untold thousands of years, Sanctuary just limped on.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, the primevals got themselves exiled to Sanctuary as part of their evil plan to use the people of the world as weapons in the eternal conflict to tip the scales, because good and evil, or light and darkness, whatever words you want to use, were too evenly balanced, right? But in so destroying the World Stone, that repeating pattern of thousands of years stops, and you start getting changes. You get Malthael coming in and wiping out so much of humanity, something that none of the primevals ever managed.
Mm-hmm.
He killed most of humans. The fact that there's any humans left is, just down to the Nephilim. Everybody, so many of them died, which means that the spirit realm draws its power from creation itself. And all those humans were part of creation. And we know that they tried to go back to the World Stone when they died, because we saw that in Malthael's, in his version of the Pandemonium Fortress. I think a lot of this stuff is building up. Things are changing after thousands of years of being held static. Narratively speaking, this is the first time that the primevals get to come back, and it no longer matters what heaven says. There's the peace treaty that they had is gone. They're openly acting to corrupt Sanctuary, and they're using the iconography of the heavens to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They're using Imperius, not Imperius, sorry, Inarius. But man, Imperius is going to have to show up at some point and do something evil. Come on. We all know he's going to. We saw him do it in Diablo 3. When push comes to shove, Imperius does the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I feel like a lot of this, I do feel like this was an awkward transition to a new form of expansion for Diablo. And I definitely think, Liz, you've actually changed my mind a little bit about the story. I'll be upfront with you. You've given me more to think about. I still think it's really good, but I get the sense of how much stuff can we pack into this thing.
Yeah.
Especially since we know these characters will all be returning in the next one. So yeah, there's stuff going on here. Nothing quite hit the emotional peak of anything don't happen to Donan. Quite frankly, when Donan was in Diablo 4, you know your heart's gonna get broken at some point, man.
And maybe that's what got me, because Diablo, the original Diablo 4 story, had some heartbreaking moments. Some where it was really pulling the threads of your heart, and it just hurt. When Vigo died, you didn't go in there expecting to feel any sympathy for Vigo, but man, that death scene. Nerel's mother died, that was heart-wrenching. When Donan just ugly crying over the body of his son. These were scenes with a huge emotional impact, and we didn't have anything quite on that level. Mephisto coming back in the body of Akarat, that was striking and terrifying, but Nerel,
it doesn't break your heart.
It doesn't break your heart. And even, the biggest emotional moment would have been Nerel crying over Akarat's spirit body, and that.
Well, you have the death of Maka for Eru. You have the death of Abulan for Eru. But we don't know. I was going to know
those characters.
Yeah, we don't know them quite the same.
We don't know Maka, and we don't really know Akarat. We've just seen Akarat kind of hovering there as a guide.
We didn't know Nerel's mother.
We kind of do, though. That's the thing. You get Nerel so clearly upset and afraid, and you keep hearing new stuff, and you find out, she's talking to Lilith, and you see the flashbacks. It's different when you don't really have the ability. You can't build a connection with Maka the same way. It's not that she's a bad character. I just feel like, to a certain degree, the character of Eru almost gets there. You almost feel for him like you do about Donan, because they do try, but it doesn't quite make it.
Yeah. And that's another thing. If they'd had a little more time with the story, you might have gotten to the point where you saw Eru betray you and it broke your heart. But I don't think you knew Eru quite well enough. You didn't see quite enough for the story felt like a tiny bit underbaked. Like it was getting close to being there, but like Matt said, you didn't get to know Maka enough for that to break your heart. You didn't get to know Eru quite enough for that to stab you in the chest with that betrayal. So I just didn't feel I felt so strongly about the original Diablo story. It crushed me in places, and it was a beautiful story, but I didn't have any of those moments in Vessel Patriot.
Which is definitely valid. but I think we're gonna have to call it there. We're a little bit over on time, so I guess parting thoughts. We've already asked where we think we're going. Let me just real quick. What do you want the story to look like moving forward? What's the one thing that you want more than anything to show up in the next expansion? Because we know we're getting at least one more. We know we're going to get more, but at least one more is guaranteed because they said they're working on it already. Liz?
Crusader class. Let's go. I mean, I do think we're actually everyone wanted a Crusader class really bad for this expansion, but I actually think right now we are very well set up to go in that direction because Akarat has such close ties to the Zakarum. We probably know that we're going to get a big Zakarum story next expansion. And with that, you can very easily see Crusaders are something in that vein coming in. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I've been playing a Necromancer for a long time, but I was a paladin in Diablo 4 before I ever started playing a Necromancer, and a Crusader. I enjoyed the Crusader in Diablo 3, so I'm looking forward to this. Maybe this will break my habit of rolling a Necromancer every season and having my character list completely full of them.
Matt?
Lorath and Elias on the tree.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Because he has to die. Not because I hate him. I like Lorath quite a bit as a character, but let's face it, he has to die for the narrative. Because who would we care about as much as we cared about watching Donan's life fall apart and watching Donan die? Lorath, because he's been with us now. You know, he was the drunk. I think the moment where you find Lorath in Ked Bardu and he says, you know, I was defeated, and he goes, you were like, by what? And he goes, by my own treacherous, opious amounts of alcohol wielded by my own treacherous hand. And you're pulling him up out of the muck and mire, and he immediately kind of snaps into something like sensibility, but he's absolutely wrecked, and he's like, I'm gonna go find this thing. If you want to go check out what's going on with the Zakarum, go for it, but then come meet me here. And you go and you're doing stuff with him, and he's petulant, and he's mercurial, and he argues with you, and you learn so much about him through it. But by the time he sees Donan die, and he's like, I'm done. I can't anymore. I'm done. Mm-hmm. You have to carry this. You've been the one carrying this the whole time. You know he's broken. Yeah. And there's nowhere for him to go anymore. He can't come back from this. It's Diablo. I think it's very likely that he'll die. I think it's very likely that Narelle will no longer be human by the end of this story, because she's basically going to have to replace Akarat.
Yeah.
And when that kind of stuff happens, there's a really great line when Narelle is questioning the hero about why they put her in this position. And Joe already mentioned it, the thing about, I had Mephisto, like Mephisto's wolf in one ear and Lilith in another. But there's that really great point. She goes, well, I was just the fist. Like, sure, you want me to fight, a lesser evil and kill it? I can do that, which is amazing, by the way. But you want me to make decisions? I can't. That's not my thing. That was your thing. And it kind of makes sense. When it comes right down to it, the heroes who save Sanctuary are never the ones who actually understand the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They're just the ones who can do something about it. So is your character... I honestly feel like at the end of this, your character is going to be Lilith. If not actually Lilith, you're going to be in that role that Lilith wanted you to be in the whole time. The problem Lilith had is that for all that she was right about the war, and she did obviously love her son, she was a demon. And demons don't have the capacity for true empathy. They're no better than angels, and they're no worse than angels. They don't understand us. So... yeah, I feel like we're gonna, at the end of this, the Wanderer is going to basically be replacing Lilith in that role of, I'm gonna save Sanctuary no matter what it takes.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. You're gonna be essentially taking over the role of Odyssean, if anything else. And not just Lilith, but like you're gonna be that beacon. The other thing that I will say that I believe Liz has one thing to take us out on here before I do my outro, but the thing that I am interested to see, and they set this up during the post sequence, the post expansion sequence for setting up the end game. you're going to be the one that kills Lorath. It's going to be you that has to collect his head. I can almost guarantee that, because of the way that it was set up, the way that the alliance between Nahantu and the Whispering Tree were made, and some of the things the tree says to you when you go and make that deal, because it literally says the deal is the same as it ever was. We will give you what you seek, but you will give us our debts. And Lorath is a debt that will have to be collected. He's out doing stuff, and he's got stuff that he wants to finish doing. But I guarantee you, when it comes time, you're going to be the one that has to kill it. You want that emotional moment? It's going to be you that has to take him out. So that's my final thoughts. Liz, before I do my outro.
I have one quote that I think is a good one to think about moving forward. The last thing the spirit of Akarat tells you is, remember this in the days to come, that in the end, Akarat was afraid. And does this lead us back to Diablo? Does this lead us, are we just circling back to Mephisto? It's just this thought of Akarat, this disciple of the light, all of this time. And in the end, Akarat was afraid.
Yeah. Well, I will say that while Akarat may be afraid, I am currently not, because we have wonderful supporters at Blizzard Watch that give us their generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch, where their continued support means that this podcast sighting community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance of having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A ads reset experience. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line and any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us up through alternate means, we have plenty of Discord channels set aside. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everybody. Same rules apply there. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can hit us up on the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. And then you can also, if you want, send us anything you want us to cover on Patreon, and we will get that there as well, because, we have that set up. You're a supporter. You get to talk to us. It's great. But with that, folks, I would like to thank Liz for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
It has been fun.
All right. Bye, everybody.